Everything is falling apart, and you're calling it a bad season. What if it's not just a rough patch? What if God is angry with you? Before you dismiss this as superstition or emotional guilt, understand this. When the Creator withdraws favor, your world doesn't burn in fire, it rots in silence. You keep praying, you keep pushing, but nothing moves. No doors open, no peace arrives, everything you touch crumbles. And you wonder, why? Friend, there are signs, clear signs, that God isn't just silent, He's offended. And His silence may be the loudest warning of all. There comes a time in every person's life when the routines they've trusted begin to betray them. The income dries up without warning. Friendships decay without cause. Health deteriorates, not by illness, but by exhaustion. It's easy, convenient even, to call this a season, a dip, a test. But what if it's not that at all? What if what you're calling a bad break is actually divine displeasure? What if the unraveling isn't life going wrong, but heaven saying, you went too far off course? When the favor of God is with you, there's a rhythm to things. Not ease, never ease, but movement. Doors open when they should. People come into your life carrying divine timing. Even in suffering, there's peace. Even in struggle, there's meaning. But when God is angry, the flow reverses. The blessing doesn't just pause, it recoils. It doesn't just stop helping, it starts resisting. You begin to labor more for less. You plant, but you don't harvest. You speak, but no one listens. You try, but nothing clicks. You can't blame this on mere coincidence because it's too patterned, too consistent. Every area begins to show signs of drought. Financially, emotionally, spiritually. You attend the same meetings, but your words no longer land. You apply the same strategies, but they collapse. It's not just failure, it's futility. And futility is the fingerprint of God's absence. This sign is subtle because it looks like ordinary hardship at first. But there is a difference between trials that develop you and consequences that warn you. A trial stretches your faith, but a consequence exposes your disobedience. If you're repeating the same patterns but receiving worsening results, you're not in a test. You're in correction. And correction is mercy disguised as resistance. God is not petty, He doesn't destroy for entertainment, but He does withdraw His hand when He is consistently ignored. That withdrawal is not always violent, it's quiet. That's what makes it terrifying. No lightning, no fire, just a slow decay of momentum. The projects you once thrived in begin to rot from the inside. The relationships you cherished begin to suffocate without explanation. And your prayers, they sound louder in your head than they do in heaven. When God is angry, He often won't speak first. He'll simply step back, and His absence speaks volumes. You'll feel it, not as thunder, but as silence. An unnerving, echoing silence that no amount of busyness can drown out. This is the moment most people make their worst mistakes. They rush, they blame others, they push harder, they call it resilience, when it's actually rebellion. You can't hustle your way out of divine opposition. You can't network your way through a closed heaven. What is blocked by heaven cannot be opened by man. You begin to feel tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that gnaws at your soul. You're drained in rooms you used to dominate. You doubt things you used to preach. You question people you used to trust, and slowly your mind starts turning on itself. That is not coincidence. That is what it looks like when you live in separation from the voice that once guided you. When the pilot leaves the cockpit, turbulence is guaranteed. But the most dangerous part is not the falling apart, it's the normalization. When you start to adapt to chaos, excuse dysfunction, and rename what is divine judgment as just life, you've already lost the awareness that could have saved you. This isn't a bad season, it's a divine signal. The collapse is not random, it's a mirror, and that mirror is showing you not what's happening to you, but what's happening between you and the one who once covered you. You can't hide a spiritual wound behind physical success forever. The soul, when it is misaligned with divine order, eventually spills its sickness into the outer world. It's easy to pretend that the spiritual realm is separate from the material, that what you believe has no bearing on what you experience. But that is a lie we tell ourselves to stay comfortable in rebellion. In truth, when your soul is corrupted, your reality will begin to reflect that corrosion, slowly, precisely, inevitably. The unseen always rules the seen. Just as a diseased root eventually distorts the fruit, a misaligned inner world poisons everything it touches externally. The consequences of divine displeasure are never confined to abstract feelings of guilt or distance. No, when God is angry, the signals start in the spirit, but they break into the physical. You can measure the invisible by observing what happens in your visible life: frustration, division, delays, exhaustion, barrenness. These are not always random afflictions. Sometimes they are divine feedback. There's a subtle but crucial difference between opposition and obstruction. When you are walking in purpose, resistance comes, but it refines you. However, when you are walking in defiance, resistance increases, but it suffocates you. You feel like you are choking on the very things that used to give you life. Your job no longer fulfills you, your body begins to deteriorate, not because of age or condition, but because of constant anxiety. Your relationships degrade, not through conflict, but through apathy, avoidance, withdrawal. You start missing deadlines, forgetting commitments, losing clarity. And what do you blame? Stress, the economy, people. But what if none of that is the root? What if these are just leaves? Leaves shaking because the spiritual wind has shifted. The anger of God rarely announces itself in thunder and fire. It often shows itself in decay. When you continually ignore convictions, instructions, warnings, your spiritual balance begins to tilt. And the first sign is usually restlessness, an unshakable unease. You can't enjoy your wins. You can't rest. Even when you sleep, you keep building, but the structure wobbles. Because God isn't mocked. If He calls you to alignment and you answer with arrogance, there is a price, and that price is usually paid in the currency of consequences. You begin to experience patterns, cycles that repeat with eerie consistency. You change jobs, but the tension follows. You change friends, but the betrayal repeats. You change cities, but the loneliness deepens. That's not a coincidence. That's a curse in motion. A spiritual imbalance spilling over into every environment you enter. Because when you're off with God, no geography will save you. The blessing that used to shield you starts turning into friction, not because God delights in your downfall, but because He will not endorse disobedience. It becomes evident in your emotional responses. You become hypersensitive to criticism, easily angered, numb to joy, addicted to distractions. You start numbing yourself, not with substances, always, but with scrolling, working, eating, escaping. Your body carries the weight of what your spirit has refused to confront. Chronic fatigue, mystery illnesses, panic attacks, all of it can be traced not just to physical imbalance, but to spiritual misalignment. And you can't medicate away a spiritual crisis. The physical realm will always echo the state of your spiritual agreement. If your soul has broken covenant, the world around you becomes unstable, business slows, love fades, time evaporates. You're moving through life like a machine, efficient but lifeless. And even the things that once brought you fulfillment begin to feel like burdens. Because nothing works correctly when it's built on broken alignment. Divine anger is not just a spiritual event. It is an atmospheric disruption. It touches your environment, your energy, your efficiency, and the more you ignore the origin, the more distorted your life becomes. What most people call burnout is often a spiritual withdrawal, God's favor pulled back, His breath removed. And without that breath, no matter how strong your will, everything you build starts to bend, then break. You can patch it with affirmations, distract yourself with productivity, but the collapse continues. Because your outer world can never outrun your inner reality. There are moments when the world outside seems calm, but inside your spirit feels like a battlefield. The mind races, the heart aches, and the soul wrestles with questions you can't articulate. You look around and everything appears stable. No disaster, no external loss, but something deep within you refuses to settle. That restlessness, that grinding unease isn't random. It's not always anxiety, not always trauma, not even always guilt. Sometimes it is divine correction. A spiritual alarm sounding off, warning you that your path has drifted from the one you were assigned to walk. Inner chaos is not just an emotional state. It is often the soul's rebellion being confronted by the spirit's memory of truth. Even when your conscious mind wants comfort, your inner being remembers alignment. You may silence your convictions with noise, with ambition, with entertainment, but the spirit does not forget. It knows when you've wandered, and when it can no longer whisper, it shakes you from within. That shaking, those sleepless nights, that unexplained heaviness, that dull ache in the middle of peace, is often the signal that God is not pleased, and He's trying to get your attention without speaking a word. You may be functioning, meeting deadlines, showing up for responsibilities, even laughing in social settings. But inside, you're spiraling. Nothing feels anchored. Your thoughts keep looping back to regret, to confusion, to unmade decisions and ignored responsibilities. Your prayers feel mechanical. Your spirit feels far from home. This is not simply mental fatigue. It is not just burnout. It is a crack in the alignment between you and your Creator, and that crack is widening. What begins as discomfort eventually becomes dysfunction. You start questioning things you once stood firm on. You start envying the peace of others while being buried in your own turbulence. And still you push it away, hoping it'll pass, thinking time will smooth it over. But time doesn't heal what obedience alone can restore. God doesn't always correct through thunderous circumstances. Sometimes He turns up the volume of your inner unrest. He increases the friction between your decisions and your peace. He allows the dissonance between your actions and your values to grow unbearable. The goal is not to torment you. The goal is to lead you back. But when correction is ignored, it turns into inner chaos, and that chaos eventually becomes your compass, pointing not to what's missing externally, but what's misaligned internally. People try to solve this chaos with external changes, a new job, a new relationship, a new location. But they take their disordered spirit with them wherever they go, and soon the new becomes as exhausting as the old. Because the chaos was never in the environment, it was in the spirit. When the soul resists divine order, it begins to tear itself apart from the inside. Peace becomes foreign. Joy becomes shallow. Purpose feels distant. Even gratitude becomes forced. The inner world becomes a fog you can't navigate. This is not punishment. It's a confrontation. There is a voice in the middle of that chaos, but it cannot be heard through surface living. You can't think your way out of divine correction. You have to submit to it. But most people avoid it. They sedate it. They medicate it. They spiritualize it into something harmless. They tell themselves they're in transition or going through a shift, when really they are in rebellion, being quietly confronted by a holy presence. And until they acknowledge it, the chaos will not subside. Because that chaos is not the problem, it's the symptom. It is not a mental disorder. It is not just emotional stress. It is the grief of a spirit that remembers who you were before you drifted, and it's trying to bring you back to that place, not through condemnation, but through discomfort. Because sometimes God won't shout from heaven, He will stir within your soul, and the more you resist, the louder the chaos becomes, not to destroy you, but to correct you. If even one of these signs hits you where it hurts, don't run. Don't deny it. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll not only recognize God's anger, you'll know how to reclaim His favor. There are few things more dangerous than a person who knows what they're called to do and refuses to do it. The world sees it as indecision. You might even label it procrastination, but heaven sees it differently. A neglected purpose is not neutral ground. It is a form of rebellion. When God gives instruction, when He deposits vision, and you bury it beneath fear, comfort, or distraction, it does not simply disappear. It becomes a grievance against you, a silent but mounting weight in your spirit. Purpose is not optional. It is not a luxury to pursue when life calms down or when circumstances become ideal. Purpose is divine assignment, crafted before your birth and woven into the very fabric of your being. To ignore that is not just to delay destiny, it is to defy it. And that defiance doesn't always bring immediate judgment, but it always brings gradual decline. Slowly, the fire that once burned bright begins to dim. You lose clarity, you lose energy, you lose favor. Not because God has changed His mind, but because you've walked away from the reason He breathed life into you in the first place. Most people don't abandon their purpose in one decisive moment. They drift, they negotiate, they make quiet compromises, choosing what's easier, safer, more socially acceptable. And little by little, their soul becomes heavy with unfulfilled assignment. You can dress it up, you can pretend you're still figuring it out. But deep down, there's a knowing, a constant, low-level conviction that never truly goes away. It whispers in the middle of your success. It echoes when the room goes quiet. It haunts the back of your mind, even in your most celebrated moments, because it's not just about what you're doing. It's about what you're avoiding. There's a difference between being busy and being obedient. You can fill your life with productivity, with achievement, with applause, and still be running from what you were actually created to do. And when you neglect your purpose long enough, it begins to show. Your gifts start to lose their sharpness. Your relationships begin to suffer. Your peace evaporates. Because when you misplace your divine energy, nothing in your life will sit right. You will succeed at the wrong things and wonder why it still feels empty. The anger of God does not always appear as punishment. Sometimes it manifests as distance. He doesn't shout, He simply withdraws. The inspiration stops flowing, the favor stops multiplying, the clarity vanishes. You're left with effort but no impact, motion but no progress. You've built a life, but it's not the one He assigned. And that, to heaven, is defiance. Not because of what you're doing, but because of what you were meant to do and chose not to. Fear is often the mask. It says, "I'm not ready," or "What if I fail?" But behind fear is often pride, the pride of believing that your timing is better than God's, that your comfort matters more than His command. You think you're protecting yourself, but what you're actually doing is hardening yourself against the very thing that would fulfill you, and heaven doesn't take that lightly. When God entrusts you with purpose, He's handing you a piece of His plan. To bury that is to insult the very breath that gave you life. The signs start subtle. Restlessness that never quite resolves. A sense of misplacement no matter where you go. An internal pressure that no amount of distraction can relieve. Over time, it gets louder. The wrong doors begin to close. The right ones stay locked. The path becomes frustrating. The vision blurs. Because God will not empower you to succeed at a life He never designed for you. The more you delay, the more you decay. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Neglected purpose doesn't disappear. It waits, and while it waits, it convicts. Not to torment, but to call you back. But the longer you resist, the heavier the correction becomes. Because eventually, heaven will confront you not just for what you did, but for what you refused to do. God is not hasty to anger, nor quick to condemn. He warns before He judges. He sends nudges, interruptions, convictions, and even people to intercept your path. But warnings are only mercies, if they're heeded. Once they're ignored long enough, they begin to shift form. What once came as grace now starts arriving as consequence, and that shift, often silent, often unannounced, is one of the most terrifying signs that divine anger is no longer theoretical, but active. A warning is not just a suggestion. It is a final opportunity to realign without cost. It comes before the collapse. It comes before the exposure. It comes before the peace is gone. But when a person begins to treat repeated warnings as background noise, they unknowingly invite the next phase, judgment. And judgment is never casual. It is precise, it is timely, and it is irreversible until repentance takes root. People rarely recognize the moment when grace transitions. That's the danger. Warnings don't come with expiration dates stamped on them. You don't know which one will be the last. The voice of conviction that once made you tremble becomes easier to ignore. The discomfort that once made you pause starts to feel normal. The delay that once made you question your decisions becomes part of the routine. You think you're getting away with it. You think God's silence is permission. But it's not. It's patience. And patience has an endpoint. When that endpoint is crossed, life doesn't always implode overnight. Sometimes it simply stops moving. Things dry up. The doors you used to walk through with ease are now bolted shut. People who once favored you become indifferent. Opportunities evaporate. It feels like a slow fade. But spiritually, a line was crossed, and the consequences are not the result of fate. They are the result of persistent deafness to the divine. Judgment isn't always fire and brimstone. Sometimes it's letting you have what you wanted and watching it break you. Sometimes it's allowing you to continue walking a path until it caves in beneath your feet. Because God will not fight for your attention forever. At some point, He will give you over to your choices, and what felt like freedom becomes a prison. You chose the path. You ignored the warnings. Now the fallout belongs to you. You'll recognize it by the increasing weight on your spirit. Not the weight of busyness, but of separation. You'll pray, and the heavens will feel like stone. You'll work, and nothing will yield. You'll ask for clarity, but your thoughts will spiral. This isn't confusion, it's distance. Not circumstantial distance, but spiritual. The warnings that were once so clear now seem faint, but not because God changed his tone, because your heart changed its frequency. It is a dangerous thing to get comfortable while being wrong, to develop rhythms that function in disobedience. You can build entire lifestyles that look successful from the outside while being under divine judgment on the inside. The collapse doesn't come because of one action. It comes because of a consistent refusal to listen. You didn't just sin, you dismissed the opportunity to correct it repeatedly. That is where the fracture deepens. Every ignored warning builds a wall between you and divine protection. At first it's barely noticeable, but over time, the voice of conviction gets drowned out by ego, pride, distraction, and logic. You justify what you used to repent for. You explain away what used to disturb your peace. And at some point, the judgment isn't just on your actions, it's on your attitude. God can correct failure, but he resists arrogance. When your heart becomes proud enough to ignore correction, you shift from being teachable to being accountable. And accountability with heaven is not light. The great tragedy is not just what you lose, but what you never become. Judgment isn't just about penalty, it's about missed potential. What would have grown under obedience now lies buried under consequences, not because God was cruel, but because he warned you again and again, and you walked away. Divine anger is never meaningless. It may be sharp, but it is not blind. It may strike hard, but it never strikes first. Beneath the weight of God's displeasure lies something almost no one recognizes in the moment. A door, not a door of escape, but a door of return. Every expression of God's wrath carries within it a coded invitation to realignment. It is not just correction, it is redirection. Not just judgment, it is mercy in disguise. The human response to divine anger is usually fear, shame, or denial. But the divine purpose behind that anger is always movement. God does not expose your failure to embarrass you. He exposes it so you can see the drift clearly. When your plans collapse, when your peace dissolves, when your confidence is broken, it isn't just life falling apart. It's heaven clearing space for you to finally look up. The pain of being out of alignment isn't just the result of sin. It's also the echo of God calling you back. You don't feel the weight of conviction unless the Spirit is still present. That uneasiness, that inner pressure, that sense of divine disapproval, it exists because he hasn't let you go. His anger is not abandonment. In fact, if he were truly finished with you, there would be silence. No warning, no grief, just distance. But when you feel his anger, when you sense his correction, it means there is still a relationship worth saving. That's what most people miss. Anger is not the end. Sometimes it's the only thing left that proves he still cares. A person only disciplines what they still hope for. God confronts what he still wants to redeem. He frustrates the path that leads to ruin, not because he enjoys your suffering, but because he refuses to endorse your destruction. When doors slam shut, when peace disappears, when favor stops flowing, it's not just punishment, it's protection. He is preventing the success of a path that would have ended in your spiritual death. And in doing so, he leaves a narrow but undeniable path back to him. The question is never whether there's a way back. The question is whether your pride will let you see it. That path is not paved with noise, it is quiet. It doesn't beg for attention, it doesn't compete with distractions, it sits in silence, waiting for you to become tired enough, broken enough, and humble enough to take it. And when you finally do, you'll realize something shocking. He was never far. You walked away, but he never moved. The anger you feared was never hate. It was holy jealousy, a refusal to share you with anything lesser than what he called you to. There is a unique kind of clarity that only comes after discipline. You begin to see what mattered all along. You begin to understand why the doors closed, why the success stopped, why the silence fell. Because you weren't being ignored, you were being interrupted. Interrupted before your gift outgrew your character, before your platform replaced your prayer life, before your name became louder than his voice. Divine anger is disruptive, but always surgical. It removes what poisons, but it never touches what still holds purpose. When God confronts you, he's not canceling you, he's cleansing you, pulling apart what you built in ego so he can restore what he designed in eternity. The process is never painless. It breaks things, it exposes things, but that exposure is the only way healing can begin. You cannot correct what you refuse to confront, and you will not confront what you continue to excuse. But when the excuses run dry, when the consequences become undeniable, you are left with the one thing that changes everything: the decision to turn back. The path is still there, beneath the rubble of disobedience, behind the walls of denial, beyond the noise of false security. His anger made sure the wrong path would fail, so that the right one would still be possible. You've heard the signs. They weren't random, they weren't abstract. They were confrontations, holy, surgical, necessary, not to shame you, but to wake you. Because when God is angry, it is not the end, it is the edge. The edge of a decision that must be made. Stay numb or return. Stay defiant or submit. Keep patching the fruit or finally address the root. You don't need another warning. You've had plenty. You don't need another excuse. You've used most of them. What you need is the one thing God cannot do for you: a decision. The heavens will not beg, grace will not compete, conviction will not force its way in. It stands there, waiting for you to respond before the judgment becomes permanent. Divine anger is not the same as human rage. He doesn't destroy because he can. He disrupts because he must. Because there is too much in you still unfulfilled. Too much left undeveloped. Too much at stake if you keep going down a road that looks safe but ends in silence. You can fool people with charm. You can mask dysfunction with progress, but you cannot fool God. And when his hand begins to resist you, nothing will work. Not your plans, not your talents, not your strategies. Because when God is against what you're building, it will collapse. Whether today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now. But if even a part of you is trembling right now, if even one of these signs exposed a place in your life you've tried to ignore, then that's not condemnation. That's invitation. The invitation to return, to repent, to realign, while the door is still open. Because God's anger is real. But so is his mercy. And if you're still breathing, you still have time to choose differently. Before the next sign becomes irreversible. Before the silence becomes permanent. Before the judgment settles in completely. Choose him again, not later. Now.